dimensions of your radio show.
Reiki, 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 Reiki.
Don't go back to sleep.
Wake up now. Wake up now. Wake up now.
Totally safe because we have the most advanced weapons in the world.
Hi everybody, great to be back with you. It's been another fantastic week. How did your week go? And going to the usual places for the news and views roundup in the alternative sector, anomalist.com. So looking through a lot of the links have been updated quite a bit over the last few days. But in the last couple of days I noticed there was an awful lot of links connected to cryptids and strange sightings. But looking at the newer links that have come up now, we've got Guy goes undercover to prove psychics aren't psychic. There's a mild amount of leg pulling going on here, but it's right up beside another link titled 5 Classic Experiments Showing Extremely Significant Results for Human Telepathy. And that one is actually a link worth checking out. If you want to read a very interesting story, this one, an Argentinian spring-heeled jack from Inexplicata. A yarn courtesy of Scott Corrales, where a firefighting crew's pursuit of an arsonist uncovers a far stranger story of vampiric activity. Now, I checked that link out. It is indeed a gripping story. I would check that out. Other links. UFO chases a cow on a farm in Chile. UFO abducting a cat in Moscow, Russia. UFO sightings around Philadelphia. Link here. A pensioner driven to sell her caravan after being pestered by UFOs. August the 8th has lots of links connected to the paranormal and life after death. And then we go on to other links covering strange noises, loud booms and earthquake swarms. There's a lovely little Kickstarter link here. And whilst we're on the subject of Kickstarters, I don't know if you've kept up with the Missing 411 crowdfunding efforts. They have reached their primary goal and they're well on their way to achieving their stretch goal. So well done on everybody for supporting that. But in case you've missed this one, there's a Kickstarter for the Am I Psychic app, using science and statistics to tell whether you've got psi abilities. So check this one out. And here's the information on this particular app. It's a newly proposed mobile app, Am I a Psychic, created by a college student who is currently seeking funds on Kickstarter to complete this project. This app is the first mobile application in the history of psychical research that is actually fun to play and actually tests your ability, he claims. There has never been anything like this before in science, which is what makes it so exciting and fun to be part of. The user can play our games using either the extrasensory perception mode or using the psychokinesis mode. Each offers the user a different and unique approach to proving their psychic ability. The ESP mode allows the user to choose between 6 options, and using the psychic ability, the user attempts to guess the future. The PK mode, psychokinesis mode, has the user choose a time limit and one of 6 options, and then the user attempts to mentally influence the chosen option. Once the time limit has expired, the user can view a mathematical but not boring graph and visually and scientifically see if they are psychic. In this big data era, another upside of the app is that it will allow users to consent to allowing the results from each of their tests to be collected and analysed as part of a larger set. Beep, 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 that's the alarm bell. With later possible publication of the results in an academic research paper. And that's on dailygrail.com, the Am I Psychic app. What else is going on? There's stories around high strangeness. And there's also a link here to Reddit. Huge collection of paranormal themed Ask Reddit threads. Huge is an understatement, I'm quoting here. This is the absolute motherlode of paranormal threads that have appeared on Reddit over the years, and has now grown to include a lot more than just Ask Reddit threads. There's ghost encounters, UFO experiences, cryptid sightings, and weird tales from truckers, policemen, ambulance drivers, nurses, and thousands of just plain, bizarre, creepy, unexplained happenings from all around the world. This should satisfy every Fortean interest you may have. I would also add as a footnote, you may have to cast a discerning eye on some of those entries, but it is entertaining, that is for sure. Reddit.com, the paranormal themes. There is tons there. And there's lots and lots more links connecting to paranormal, ghosts, lots of UK interest stories here. We really do get a huge representation in the global market when it comes to the paranormal. It does make me wonder how we're viewed as a nation when it comes to paranormal themes. So what else is going on? Did you catch the show last weekend? Simon Parkes doing Connecting Consciousness on JP's show, the Wolf Spirit Radio. Very interesting show, lots of great content, especially if you've got an interest in the DNA strands arena. Lots of stuff covered in there, and Simon goes into great detail with that. He does pack in an awful lot of information on every show that he does, and his shows, Connecting Consciousness, are always on the first Sunday of every month. I think he's done 3, is it 3? 1? Yeah, he's done 3 shows now on the Wolf Spirit Radio, and it feels like he's really settled into what the format of that is, and it's primarily a questions and answers format. Lots of people write in, they have questions and queries, and Simon gives his take on it, and there's some really engaging stuff in there. And it was also time for the newsletter, and I just thought I'd give a couple of excerpts on the August newsletter. In the first paragraph, he says, on the 1st of August, we had our first gathering of 35 members of the Connecting Consciousness, assembled in Derby to meet each other for the first time and share the joint vision that we all have in connecting consciousness. And this, I know this is primarily going to be only of interest to the UK crowd, but Simon's, near the end of the letter, Simon's quoted that following Saturday's meeting, we now have a number of members who have offered to coordinate the Connecting Consciousness group, and once they are in place, the structure and interaction of each group will be made clear. This promises to be a very exciting time. And he finishes on his final paragraph by saying, we continue to suffer a range of energetic and psychic attacks, and I am deeply indebted to everyone who has tirelessly given their time and energy to the Connecting Consciousness. Thank you all, and I hopefully will have something positive to report after the 15th of August. Much love, much strength, much hope, Simon of simonparks.org. There you go. So we've covered the UK scene, and we've covered some of the interesting connections. Did you see the news last week about who's hosting the Secret Space Program conference? Well, of course you heard. That was quite exciting. I don't even need to say any more, because everybody already knows. Of course they know. There you go. The roundup for the alternative news and views arena.
Dimensions and Beyond Radio Show.
I'm going to give you an account of a very interesting article from a link that was given by anomalous.com. Now initially I started looking at this and thought, here we go. But actually, as the article goes on, it really starts throwing up some interesting questions. And it just sounded like a very intriguing account, so that's why I wanted to cover it today. It's titled Attempted Abduction by Gnomes. Of all the strange phenomena I have described, few are so enigmatic as the appearance of miniature humanoids. Elves, goblins, gnomes, call them what you like. I don't know what they might be, but I have no explanation for them, and I have reservations about many of the reports, but I have heard enough not to scoff at them. Last week I received an extraordinary account by email. I am convinced this is an account of a genuine experience. Make of it what you wish. But as she puts it, and then he goes on to quote, I suspect my account will be ridiculed and or disbelieved. I doubt I'd believe it myself if I'd read it somewhere else. But who knows, someone may have experienced something similar, in which case they might be relieved to know they're not alone with their experience. This lady starts her story. The reason I'm writing now is because once or twice you've mentioned those who believe in fairies and gnomes, etc., and the impression I gained was one of, that's how deluded some people are. But for the larger part of my life, I would have agreed with you. However, I became one of those people you mentioned, and just as you'd said, you were initially highly skeptical of this, only to later change your opinion. Perhaps my experience might persuade you to consider little people sightings as potentially valid. I am now in my late 60s, and the experience I'll briefly relate here took place on the southern Gold Coast, Queensland, 1984. Our house was less than 10 years old, as were all the others in the area. At the time the event took place, I was divorced and lived in the house with my 2 young children. I had no interest in fairies, goblins, gnomes, elves and the like. If asked if I'd believed in little people, I would have unhesitatingly replied no. But in 1984 I attended a seminar in New Zealand. The driver, a colleague, carried my suitcase into my home. He conducted a cursory check of the premises before departing, and I knew my children were in the care of a neighbour and I was to collect them in the following morning. She goes on to say, It was very rare to have a night to myself, and being well rested and relaxed, I was looking forward to spending a few hours reading or watching TV. Firstly, I made a cup of tea, and as I sipped the tea, I decided I might as well unpack, and I carried an armload of clothes up to my bedroom and hung them in the wardrobe. I noticed the light in the room seemed unusually bright. Something was strange about the atmosphere, but I had no time to analyze it before I was overcome with exhaustion so intense that I only had time to stagger backwards to the bed, and I lay face up on the bed. Next thing I knew, I could hear the sound of several voices. They were argumentative voices and seemed to be telling each other to hurry, hurry. I managed to lift my head and looked down to the source of the voices, and there were several small people. They were trying to pull me from the bed, feet first, and into the wardrobe. The wardrobe was only 1/2 meter approximately from the foot of the bed, and now the little people were trying to pull me into the left-hand side of that wardrobe. I experienced no shock or alarm. Instead, I told myself I had lots of time to continue sleeping because I was far too big and heavy for them to move very far. Now, I'm of the opinion those thoughts were not my own, but were in some way suggested to me. Whatever the case, I lost consciousness again because the next thing I can remember is waking up to find several people crowded round me. They didn't speak as far as I know, and I was lying with my head at the foot of the bed, so my feet must have been at the head of the bed. I have a very clear memory of how the people appeared. There were males and females. The creatures appeared as the typical gnomes or peasants from storybooks. Based on the height of the bed, their height was perhaps 2 to 2.5 feet tall. They were overdressed. Their clothing was suited to a much colder climate. I can remember it in considerable detail because in those days I did a lot of home sewing. Their skin looked weathered as if they worked outdoors a lot, and they also had a muddy cast. They had strong facial bones, wide cheekbones, wide jaws, strong chins and noses. Their eyes and mouths were long horizontally, but vertically narrow, and seemed, the best way to describe them was as though their faces were squashed, as if a heavy weight had been placed on top of their heads, squashing them downwards. Their bodies were stout, robust, deep chests, broad waists, strong shoulders. I must have lost consciousness again because when I saw them next I was still in the same position, and they were now in the centre of the room, looking at me. I looked back at them, still felt no fear or alarm. I just looked at them, and they looked at me. I had no thought processes at the time. There just seemed to be more of them than before. Next, I was aware of the voices again, talking over the top of each other, urging each other to hurry, hurry. I raised my head, and to my alarm saw that they had almost succeeded in pulling my legs from the bed. My body was now right way up on the bed again, and my head was at the head of the bed and my feet near the wardrobe. When I saw they'd almost pulled my legs from the bed, a surge of adrenaline shot through me, and I grasped that it wouldn't be much longer before gravity did the rest of the job for them. I yelled out and kicked at them. Then I jumped from the bed into the centre of the room. The room seemed far brighter than usual, and I can remember standing there yelling at them. I still wasn't afraid, but I was very angry with them. They muttered between themselves. They looked and sounded resigned and bitter. Then they filed into the half-open door of the wardrobe, and they seemed to go in and then down, as if filing down a ramp inside the wardrobe. I stood there watching them for probably a few seconds, and then, still with the light seemingly far brighter than usual, I turned towards the door and left the room. I left the room, walked through the hallway towards the living room, and that's when I became completely consumed with terror. Nothing happened between yelling at the creatures and making it towards the living room, but in those few seconds I was overtaken by sheer terror, which seemed to escalate with every instant. I've never known fear like it, but yet there was no real reason for it, and I suspect now that when the creatures departed they removed whatever calming influence they'd subjected me to throughout the ordeal. The story goes on and gets a little bit more interesting. So she goes on. Several times she posted some details of her encounter on various online forums as the internet grew, and then she discovered there was a group known as the Elves Project, which professes to be an organisation with expertise in gnomes and elves, etc. So she submitted her account to the Elfen group, and received a reply from someone who described himself as Professor B, who had claimed he'd just returned from Patagonia, where he'd been investigating gnome-type entities there. And he said that Elfen was involved at that time with approximately 60 families in Canada and the US, families whose homes harboured gnome and similar type entities. So she goes on to say to Malcolm in her letter, I do appreciate how ridiculous my experience will sound to you, but that's the reason I didn't discuss it with those I knew at the time, and in all the years afterwards. But my daughter revealed as an adult that she'd always known about the gnome entities at our house in question. It explained many of her behaviours when she was a child. I asked her why she hadn't told me all those years ago, and she replied that even as a young child she'd known that she would not be believed, and it pains me to admit that she was correct. I would probably have told her the gnomes did not exist, and that she'd simply dreamt it or imagined it. But when I think back to how terrified I'd been as an adult, I can hardly bear to think of what it must have been like for her as a child. She concludes in her part of her account to Malcolm's anomalies by saying, in the conclusion, she goes on to say, the Elfen Project said that gnome-type entities have been reported from almost all corners of the globe, including Hawaii, which was a surprise to me, she goes on to say. When I was searching for answers, I wondered if, because I was born in the UK, that the gnomes might have been some sort of genetic race memory. And I'd thought of gnomes being of Northern European myth, but the American Indians are aware of them, and according to what I've read, she says, they've warned their children never to communicate with the creatures, in addition to leaving gifts for the little entities in the hope that their crops would not be destroyed. But my reason for writing to you is, she says, to let you know that the reason some people believe in little people is because they have no option, having experienced them. Despite being assured that I should consider myself privileged to have had the experience, I do not feel that way, and wish my daughter and I had been spared of it. I was scared of the experience, scared of what it might mean, and how it might reflect on me. I knew that I was sane, but knew I'd appear otherwise, just as I realised how unbelievable this must sound. And Malcolm finishes off this entry by saying, I wonder whether the later residents of the house experienced anything anomalous, and I wonder how many other bizarre stories are out there which people are unwilling to tell for fear of ridicule. There you go, Malcolm's musings on attempted abductions by gnomes.
Dimensions and Beyond Radio Show.
Now, following on from the Malcolm's Musings article, where that particular lady submitted an email letter to Malcolm talking about her experience that she had in 1984, I thought that I would follow this story up with a little supplement from a discussion that I had with one of my friends, who has also experienced a variety of small creatures of the elements and nature. Because she and I were talking about something similar. This would be a couple of years ago now. But I'd always had a fascination with all the different representations of what people had reported when they had encountered elves, fairies, pixies, and all of the earth realm creatures, little creatures, the fairies. And she had talked about a couple of experiences that she had had, and one of them related to when she had gone over to Ireland. She'd been invited over to Ireland she was camping nearby. Now, she'd gone over with a friend, a male friend, and they were both going to share a tent. And she's very pagan, and she has no problem with, connecting up with nature. She does a lot of, or she has done a lot of camping out. And her colleague, her friend, he was also very used to camping out. So pooling their resources and deciding that two of them occupying a tent was, good security and just general all-round better for sharing of resources, etc. They had agreed that they were going to share a tent nearby in a field next to the edge of some trees, but within about a half-hour walk to the place where the event was being held. Now, I don't know if anybody listening to this has been to Ireland, but there are lots of areas in Ireland which just feel completely untouched by time. And by all accounts, from what she described, this was one of those areas that felt as though they were quite close to ancient woodland. And because they loved nature, each of them in their own connection with nature, they loved the nature realms. This is the best spot. Why don't we pitch the tent here? It's not in the way of anything. It's a little bit discreet. We can't be seen from the road, and be a bit of a low profile. Now, unbeknownst to her friend, her colleague, had decided that he was going to load himself up with some drugs previous to attempting to settle down for the night. Now, she had no idea that he was going to do this. But when she had discovered that he had taken some drugs, she realized that she was going to have to pretty much keep an eye on him and make sure that he didn't do anything stupid, vomit, etc. All of those things. And she's actually pretty used to doing this. She's been around some hardcore party revelers in her time, and she is often given a kind of maternal caretaking role in just making sure everybody's okay. So she went straight into that role, and she was kind of cursing and swearing at the fact that, for the next couple of hours, she was going to have to keep a close eye on this guy and make sure that he didn't throw up in the tent. And she says what happened next, because it was still actually quite light. It was the summer months, the nights are really light until quite late. And she said what happened next could have been quite a beautiful encounter. But because this guy was doped up on drugs, I know it wasn't cannabis. I know it was something much stronger, which was why she was annoyed and why she felt that she really had to keep an eye on him. But what happened next, she became aware of the sensation of little beings around the tent. Now, they're both on the inside, and this guy's talking mindlessly, and generally not being very connective. He's just being very expressive. And she says, and I'm sitting there thinking, bloody great, I've got to look after this idiot now for the next 2 or 3 hours, and he didn't even tell me this was going to happen. If I'd have known, we might have made different arrangements, and now I'm stuck. I'm going to have to keep an eye on him. And she says, now she was thinking this, that she became aware of shadows, small shadows. Now, I'm thinking of the sizes that she indicated. And contrary to all the reports that other lady submitted in her article, the sizes of what my friend reported more closely aligns with something between 6 inches to a foot tall. And these humanoid shapes, it was as if they were curious. She said that their bodies actually looked like they were stretched, in contrast to what the Queensland lady on Malcolm's Musings reported. Her encounter was that these beings looked much more stretched, very skinny, very thin, and she said they were leaning up against the tent. And she said that meant you could see the silhouette of them very, very clearly. And she says that in itself was absolutely fascinating, and because she is very seasoned with connecting up in a much more sacred way, she's very practiced at connecting up with the elemental realms. She knows her stuff when it comes to this kind of thing. She was already slipping into a, hello friends, I'm connecting with you, I am a friend of the earth, etc., etc., before she had become aware of the guy that she was looking after letting out the biggest howl and basically having the biggest meltdown that she'd ever witnessed. And he was seeing the same things and was completely freaking out. And she said it was all she could do to hold this guy still and stop him ripping through the tent in abject fear and terror. And she said she knew that she was fighting him being drugged up, and that was what the problem was. That despite his protests that he was connected to nature, he had wobbled out in a very spectacular fashion, and he was freaking out big time. And she said this encounter that she had with these little beings, whilst he was going off on one in a big way, lasted for up to an hour. And it was getting dark as well, so it was actually getting more difficult to see what was going on. And all that time she was trying her best to maintain a kind of telepathic connection with these little creatures, to say, I'm sorry about the noise, I'm sorry about my friend's reaction, he's not in his right mind. And I just, the recounting of that story from years ago just flashed through my head when I was reading this article that this lady had submitted. But on top of all of that, when we had our Reiki Share on Friday, I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this. We had an encounter, and it was experienced by more than one person, so I don't feel like I'm totally going out on the ledge saying this. We had an encounter with very little beings, little winged beings. And in all my energetic encounters, I've never seen tiny little winged beings. So this was a source of delight and wonder and, ooh, I've not seen you before, kind of sensation. And all of that came flooding through my head when I was reading that story about this woman's encounter. It was a story that has left me thinking a lot more about the little people and the variations of encounters that people have with the little people. Well, we're on the subject of the Reiki Share. I think I'm wanting to go into a little bit more detail about that particular Reiki Share, because I had another quite profound experience on that last Reiki Share. And I said to you last week, when I was compressing a ton of information into last week's podcast, I mean, there just wasn't enough room to go into it then, but there's room to go into it this week. There was some quite interesting things happened on that share. It was the night of the blue moon, and I have since then had some really weird dreams. I know there's a lot going on at night, but I just can't fully recall it when I wake up. But that's another issue. So at the Reiki Share, there was only 5 of us there. Nice small gathering. But I have noted that this is the second time that we have seen the gold beings. And I don't know if you remember my first story, my first encounter with the gold beings, but it was when we had the solar eclipse earlier this year. So on a Reiki healing group energy gathering, the energy of the healings slightly rarefies and intensifies on every treatment. And we give each treatment about a 10-minute window, and then we have a sort of about 10 minutes group feedback session. But each treatment session is like turning a dial incrementally, one click at a time on every treatment. So we tend to give the first 1 or 2 treatments a bit longer because it feels like the energy is still ramping up and intensifying. But by the time you get halfway through, we're in full flow, and you can do a really short treatment on that last treatment because it's at full intensity and everybody's getting imagery, sensory information, and some sense of connection with it all. So we started on the final recipient on the treatment couch, and within seconds we're all in the zone, sensing, intuiting, energy flowing, and I am aware that I am very visual when it comes to energetic interactions, and especially with Reiki shares. And there were quite a few firsts that I encountered on that particular evening, and one of them was that I could see with my third eye tiny fluffy little gold lights about the size of 2 centimeters in diameter. I later called them tiny gold pom-poms because they had a really fuzzy edge to them, and they were zipping about in our energy fields and between us as we stood around the treatment couch. Now, the gold lights started off maybe 2, 3 in number, but then there was another, and before I knew it, there were these tiny gold fuzzy lights, and they were leaving a gold fibre trace as they were zipping about. And I just started to become captivated by how gleeful and even cheeky the energy was. But the zipping about increased, and that gold-like fibre trace remained longer and longer in the air until there was it was like a spider web of gold filament light that I had crisscrossed lots of times. And it created an orb of light trace all around us, but also through us, and we were literally meshed into this connection in light. And the whole thing was all in the same colour, and it was like an antique gold or Indian gold. If you've ever seen Indian gold jewellery, you'll know it's a slightly darker gold. And I could see that we were receiving and giving energy, and it was all happening all at the same time, and it seemed to be completely inconsequential as to who was actually lying on the treatment couch at the time, because we were all completely immersed in this gold filament light mesh. And then these gold filaments seemed to extend outwards from the back of our heart chakras. Now this is similar to the first encounter that we had with these gold beings. There was definitely a heart chakra connection there, a heart energy point connection there. But this was like seeing it sort of reversing. Instead of sort of seeing originally on that first encounter with the gold beings, I could see the beings, I could see a light trace coming in from their heart chakras. But at this point, there was this, gold mesh orb that had enveloped us, and our own heart chakras were pushing out from our backs, were pushing out, and these filament extensions stopped midair. They'd extended out about 3 or 4 feet, and at the end of these extensions, I could see what appeared to be another heart forming at the end of that extension. And then these gold beings literally filled in around these gold hearts. And that was what was breathtaking for me. They were the energy, and the energy was them. We were all connected up in it, through it, round it, inside it. And there was a very brief, like millisecond of me sensing the word or the concept synapse in amongst all of this. But that seemed to pass really quickly. And I think it was because these gold fizzy fluffy lights were still zipping along these filament trace mesh lines. But during all of this, whilst that was all going on, and I could see these beings kind of forming around these heart chakra points, so that heart chakra was actually their heart chakra, directly connecting in with our heart chakras, I could see more detail filling out. And it was all done in this gold mesh. It seemed to make physical form. And I could see that all of these gold beings were all the same height, maybe 5 foot to 5'2" Yeah, about 5 foot to 5'2". And they all wore the same type of simple, elegant robe. It was functional, it was long. But this was the first time that I could actually really see the soft folds in the material surface. It was all in gold-like form, but again, it was really easy to see how this would look in physical form. And all of these beings, they were a team. I mean, I know that that's obviously going to be the case, but that one vibration was running through all of them and all of us and all of the energy that was flowing at that moment. And as is always the case with this kind of experiential stuff, trying to label that vibrational energy, it was a mixture of celestial and sort of angelic, but not typically angelic. There was an enchantment energy in it. It was really difficult. It is really difficult to describe. But in amongst all of that, I mean, it was a short treatment session, high intensity, and even thinking about it now, it's It's making my back kind of shiver because it was just awesome that there was so much information that was connected up in that moment that connected to a sensation of these guys being a team, but making some level of commitment to working with us in the Reiki group, because it was somehow that we had made our own commitment that we were all going to be turning up. And we've been turning up regularly now for quite a while, but somehow, somewhere, we passed some kind of threshold, and it was the sensation of this rubber stamp of, right, we've decided, this Gold Beings team, we've decided we're going to work with you, and we're committing to working with you for this distance. You know, it was a sensation of, we're going to be with you for a while. But the energy of that encounter has been running in the background for quite a few days, and there's been an awful lot falling into place, an awful lot that's been kind of carrying on in my own introspection since that moment. But in essence, I think the whole energy line of that started before we even got to the festival. There's been a thread of connection in time that goes back a few weeks, and I can feel that something has been processing and developing there for quite a long time. But I really hold the belief that the festival kicked out a whole load of crap that I was carrying in my body, because we were talking about it today, again, talking about the festival. I just don't think there is anywhere else that I could have experienced that amount of energy, work, progression, and development in such a short space of time. It was a real powerhouse of energy experience, especially for a sensitive empath like me. And I'm not even sure why I'm telling you this, but I'm telling you it anyway. That's what I'm going to leave you with today.
Share.